I would like to apologize, my phone cut out again because I need to keep tapping it and when it gets darker and I forgot because I was so wrapped up. I would like to mention that this does mention rape. And I would really, if you are really uncomfortable with that, then I do not recommend listening to the rest of this book, because it does mention that kind of vividly in this chapter and a little bit later. Maybe, I don't know if it's still in the same chapter, but I know a little later it does because I've only read to the 4th chapter. There's only 5 chapters in this book, by the way. Alright, that was just a little message from me. Let's get back to where I was. Draco nodded, still not making eye contact. He slid off of Harry's lap to pull his pants and trousers up. When he made his way through the maze of beds and out of earshot, Pomfrey turned to Harry. I probably shouldn't be sharing this with you, she began, a low voice. But for the purpose of the summer, and you are his guardian, she smiled slightly. And I can see how much you care for him, Harry nodded. So I'll tell you what I found. Harry braced himself, knowing it wasn't good. Someone's been raping that child, Pomfrey managed to say without quaver. He had extensive damage. There was evidence of excessive tearing and extreme muscle damage. His problem with the frequent accidents, he's had something forced into his rectum, something far too large for the size of a toddler's passage. His muscles were simply stretched too far to do their intended purpose, and it was done repeatedly. There were several scars that looked to be older than others. She paused, taking in Harry's constant. Harry? She asked worriedly. Harry shook his head, foreseeing her questions. He could barely manage to hold on to his anger at this point without being forced to acknowledge someone else. The anger slowly burned through his gut, making him feel nauseous. It radiated out to his extremities, forcing his hands into tight fists, and his muscles were too tense to the point of quivering. He viewed everything in a red haze. He couldn't seem to focus on anything but the wall in front of him. Madame Pomfrey jumped a bit as the cabinets began to rattle slightly. Her wand on the medicine tray to jump and roll. She shot another look at Harry. He had closed his eyes. His lips were pressed tightly together, white and pinched. His cheeks had flush of high color in them, but the rest of his skin was pale. Harry? She could not question again. She couldn't not question again. He opened his eyes, and the shaking stopped. He slowly unclenched his fist in one muscle at a time. Loosened the taunt pull. I'm alright, he managed to rasp out. Have you repaired the damage? He continued. She nodded slowly. Yes, I casted a muscle tightening spell. We used it for estrofoamed limbs, but I think it'll work just as well in this instant. Harry grunted. Good. Thank you, Madame Pomfrey. She frowned. Harry, are you alright? He smiled thinly at her. I'm fine. I'm back in control now. He turned to watch a small blonde as he found chocolate and scampered his way over to Harry's side. Puppet, he asked as he knelt down to Draco. Can I ask you something? Draco nodded without hesitation. Draco, love, who hurt you there? He gestured to Draco's backside. While never taking his eyes off Draco's expression as such, he watched all the color drain from the boy's face as a glazed expression took over his eyes. Draco's hands began to shake, and his head quickly followed. "No one, Harry," he answered monotoned. "No one hurt me." "Draco, pop it. You don't have to cover for anyone." Harry chased him gently. The chocolate fell from Draco's hands. The boy slumped to the ground and wrapped his arms around his own legs, curling in a fetal position. He buried his face in his knees and began rocking slightly. Harry bit his lip. "Draco," he reached a hand out hesitantly, torn between needing to know and needing to comfort, as a tiny whimper escaped comfort one. He pulled the small boy into his arms and took over the rocking motion. "Draco, baby, it's all right. You don't have to say anything," he whispered into his hair. "I'm sorry, love. I'm so sorry." Draco gradually unwrapped his arms around his own legs and stuck them around Harry's waist. Harry stood up, lifting Draco up with him. He looked at Madame Pomfrey. "Oh, I'm taking him with me," he stated. She didn't disagree. She just held open the door for him. On their way, she pressed a tender hand over Draco's bright head. She watched as Harry carried the abused boy out of sight, and then she headed straight for the fireplace to flew Albus Dumbledore. Harry made a beeline for the dungeons. He stopped in the common room long enough in order for Greg and Vince to come with him, silently surprised when they made no noise about it, just exchange of looks, and stood to follow. He then headed down a different corridor, one he had avoided for the last few days. Moments later, he found himself pounding on the door to Severus Snape's personal quarters. The potions master opened the door, irritation evident on every line of his body. As soon as he spied a curled-up Draco resting on Harry's arms and determined the look on Harry's face, however, he moved aside and ushered them all in. Harry set Draco down carefully. He bent to look him in the face. "Hey, Poppet, why don't you play in Uncle Severus' room? I'm sure he wouldn't mind if you practiced jumping on his bed," he added, a winning grin to the request. Draco was soon following with his own mischievous style. "Can I, Uncle Severus?" he asked plaintively. Snape frowned a tiny bit, but Harry nodded reassuringly. Of course, my boy. Be careful not to bounce completely off." "I won't," Draco called over his shoulder as he sailed into the back room. Harry pulled the other three males into the farthest corner of the room to talk without having Draco overhear him. "What is this about, Mr. Potter?" Snape demanded in a low voice. "What is this about, Mr. Potter?" I can't do Snape, and I'm sorry. Harry couldn't help it. His fists clenched up again, and he grit his teeth together before forcing out his next word. "So, how many of you knew that Lucius Malfoy raped Draco on a regular basis?" Jaws dropped. No one could say a word for long minutes then. "How did you discover this bit of information?" Snape breathed. Harry glared at him, rage flowing through him. "Well, Snape, I'll give you that answer just as soon as you tell me if you knew of this or not," he hissed. "No!" Snape jerked back physically. "Never! I had known that bastard was. I would have. Well, I have. Oh, sorry. Ow, I misspoke completely. Oh my god, I apologize so much. I botched that part. Let me restart." "No!" Snape jerked back physically. "Never! Had I known that bastard was, I would have. Well, I would have done something a long time ago about it, he finished clumsily. But the look on his face told it all, and Sandra, just what it was he would have done. Harry relaxed. Good. Now he looked at the other two. And neither one of you knew. Two heads shook in union. Vince looked about ready to cry. How did you? Was all he managed. Remember when I told you I was going to take Draco to Madame Pomfrey, see if he could stop going in his trousers? Nods from the other two boys. A confused look from Snape. Harry sighed. Well, anyway, I did, and she examined him and found out that he had been right at this age, to the point where his calico muscles couldn't work anymore. That's why he kept missing himself. She found old scars and new scars, like he'd been molested quite a few times. He fixed an eye on each of them. He fixed a stony eye on each of them. If Malfoy did that when he was 5, what other things did he have to go through when he got old enough to participate? Greg winced. Drake closed his eyes briefly. Then Vince lunged for the waste can next to Snape's desk and lost his breakfast. Greg moved closer and absentmindedly rubbed the back fence until he could stand once again. He then enveloped the smaller boy in a tight embrace. Snape merely raised an eyebrow at that. Harry wanted to smile at the first sign of affection they'd let him see, but he was just too worked about Draco. Oh, Merlin. Snape covered his face with his long, bony hands. I should have